The acceptance letter trembled in my hands as I stood in the doorway of our family's grand living room, watching my parents fawn over Claire's latest watercolor masterpiece. Harvard Law School, full scholarship. But instead of celebration brewing in my chest, I felt the familiar hollow ache of being invisible in my own home. Well, my mother said without even glancing up from Claire's painting of some abstract swirls she'd thrown together in 20 minutes. I suppose even broken clocks are right twice a day. My father didn't look up from his newspaper, though I caught the slight shake of his head, that same disappointed gesture I'd seen 1,000 times when I achieved something that should have made them proud. Harvard's standards must be slipping, he muttered just loud enough for me to hear. Claire finally deigned to acknowledge my existence, her perfectly manicured fingers still dripping with paint as she turned toward me with that sweet smile that had fooled everyone but me for 18 years. Oh, Emma, that's wonderful. Though I have to say, I'm a bit surprised they accepted you. Didn't you say your LSAT scores were just okay? Just okay. My scores had been in the 99th percentile. That's when the memories hit me like a sledgehammer to the skull. I remembered everything. My previous life, my death at 28, alone in a sterile hospital room while my family attended Claire's art gallery opening across town. The years of working 3 jobs to fund Claire's endless parade of failed ventures while my own dreams withered and died. The slow, grinding destruction of my health and spirit as I poured everything I had into a family that saw me as nothing more than a convenient ATM and emotional dumping ground. I remembered the exact moment I'd realized I was dying, lying in that hospital bed, chest tight with the heart attack that would kill me, scrolling through Claire's Instagram posts from her gallery opening. Posts about her journey as an artist, and how grateful she was for her supportive family. Not a single mention of the sister who'd worked herself to death to make it all possible. I remembered my parents' faces at my funeral, the confusion, the guilt, but mostly the panic as they realized their safety net was gone. I remembered overhearing my mother whisper to my aunt, "What are we going to do about Claire now?" Even at my own funeral, I'd been nothing more than a problem to be solved. But here I was, 18 again, holding a Harvard acceptance letter with the chance to do everything differently. I folded the letter carefully and slipped it into my bag, my movements deliberate and calm despite the revolution happening in my mind. Actually, I said, looking each of them directly in the eye for the first time in either lifetime, I've decided to decline Harvard. The room went dead silent. My father's newspaper crinkled as his grip tightened. My mother's hand froze halfway to Claire's paintbrush. Claire herself looked up with those wide blue eyes that had manipulated our parents for decades. "Don't be ridiculous, Emma," my father said, finally setting down his paper with an irritated snap. "It's a decent opportunity. You'd be foolish to waste it." Decent. A full ride to Harvard Law was decent. For me to spend the next 7 years of my life funding Claire's lifestyle while she finds herself as an artist? I smiled sweetly, mirroring Claire's practiced expression. "No, thank you." My mother's face went through a fascinating series of transformations. Confusion, then anger, then something that looked almost like fear. "What's gotten into you, Emma? This isn't like you." She was right. The old Emma would have quietly accepted their dismissal, would have gone to Harvard and worked part-time jobs to send money home, would have graduated into a career chosen specifically for its earning potential rather than personal fulfillment. The old Emma would have spent the next decade slowly killing herself to keep this family afloat. But I wasn't the old Emma anymore. I was the Emma who'd already lived through this nightmare once and had no intention of repeating it. "I've already enlisted in the military," I continued, watching their faces pale in real time. "I leave for basic training next week." This was my masterstroke, planned during the long nights I'd spent lying awake after the memories returned, strategizing how to escape the toxic quicksand of my family dynamics. The military would give me everything I needed: structure, purpose, financial independence, and most importantly, physical distance from the people who'd spent 18 years conditioning me to believe my worth was tied to my usefulness to them. My father stood up so abruptly, his chair scraped against the hardwood floor. "You can't be serious. What about your responsibilities to this family?" "You mean my responsibility to work myself to death while Claire plays artist?" I tilted my head, genuinely curious. Could you explain exactly what I owe any of you? The question hung in the air like a toxic cloud. I could see the wheels turning in their heads as they tried to formulate an answer that didn't sound completely insane when said out loud. How do you explain to someone that they owe you their entire life simply for being born? Claire finally found her voice, though it came out higher and more shrill than her usual carefully modulated tones. Emma, you're being dramatic. We're family. We support each other. I almost laughed. Support each other? Like when you borrowed my savings to buy art supplies last month and never paid me back? Like when mom made me give up my spot in the advanced placement program because you needed tutoring in basic math? Like when dad sold my car to pay for your pottery wheel and told everyone I donated it to charity? Each example hit them like a physical blow. I'd been documenting their behavior this time around, keeping careful track of every slight, every manipulation, every theft disguised as family obligation. In my previous life, I'd been too gaslit to trust my own perceptions. This time, I had the clarity that comes from already having lived through the consequences. That's not, my mother started, but I cut her off. It's exactly what happened. I have the bank statements. I have the emails. I have the receipts for everything I've paid for that you've claimed credit for. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the meticulously organized documentation I'd been building for months. Would you like me to read them out loud? My father's face had gone an interesting shade of red. You're being ungrateful, Emma, after everything we've done for you. Like what? I interrupted. Specifically, what have you done for me that I should be grateful for? The silence stretched out painfully as they struggled to come up with examples that didn't involve me giving more than I received. I could see them mentally cataloging 18 years of interactions, searching for moments when they'd prioritized my needs over Claire's, when they'd celebrated my achievements, when they'd treated me like a daughter rather than an unpaid servant. They came up empty because those moments didn't exist. You gave me a roof over my head and food to eat, my mother finally said, her voice tight with defensive anger. That's more than a lot of children get. The bare minimum required by law, I agreed pleasantly. The same things you give to Claire, except she also gets college funds, art supplies, private tutoring, a car, designer clothes, and unconditional emotional support. I get a roof and food in exchange for being your live-in therapist, accountant, and personal assistant. Claire's face had gone white. I don't think it had ever occurred to her that our treatment was different, that the sacrifices I'd made for her comfort weren't freely given, but extracted through emotional manipulation and family obligation. I never asked you to do any of that, she whispered. You didn't have to ask. It was just expected. The family golden child shouldn't have to worry about money or consequences or actually earning anything she wanted. That's what the scapegoat sister was for. I stood up, shouldering my bag with movements that felt ceremonial, like I was shedding an old skin. But I'm done being your scapegoat. I'm done funding Claire's delusions of artistic grandeur. I'm done being the family ATM and emotional dump. My mother's composure finally cracked entirely. You can't just leave. What about Claire's college applications? What about the business accounts? What about finding someone else to exploit? I finished. I hear there are actual professionals who do bookkeeping and therapy. You should look into hiring them. The desperation in her eyes was almost pitiful. For 18 years, I'd been their solution to every problem, their answer to every crisis. Without me, they'd actually have to figure out how to function as adults. Emma, please, my father said. And there was something in his voice I'd never heard before, genuine panic. Let's talk about this rationally. If it's money you're worried about, we can work something out. A salary for your help with the business, maybe an allowance. You want to pay me minimum wage to do the job of 3 people while funding your other daughter's lifestyle? I shook my head. That's generous, Dad, but I'll pass. I walked toward the door, each step feeling lighter than the last. For the first time in 2 lifetimes, I was walking toward my own future instead of away from it. This is a mistake, my mother called after me, her voice taking on that manipulative tone I knew so well. Part threat, part guilt trip, part desperate plea. Family is everything, Emma. When you're older, you'll regret this. You'll come crawling back and we might not be here waiting for you. I paused at the doorway and turned back to look at them one last time. My parents, standing stiff and shocked in their designer living room, surrounded by the fruits of my labor. Claire, still holding her paintbrush like it was a lifeline, her eyes wide with the first real fear I'd ever seen there. "You're right," I said softly. "I probably will regret this, but I'd rather regret leaving than regret staying. I already know how that story ends." I walked out that door and didn't look back. The next week passed in a blur of final preparations and increasingly frantic attempts from my family to drag me back into their dysfunction. My phone buzzed constantly with messages that progressed from angry to pleading to threatening and back to pleading again. From Mom, "I've canceled your cell phone plan. Come home and we'll talk." From Dad, "The family lawyer says you can't enlist without parental consent until you're 18. We'll see about that." From Claire, "I don't understand why you're being so mean to me. I thought we were friends." That last one almost broke my resolve. Claire genuinely didn't understand what was happening because she'd never had to understand. She'd lived her entire life as the center of everyone else's universe, never having to consider how her existence affected the people around her. In her mind, I'd always been happy to sacrifice for her because that's just what sisters did. But I'd learned the hard way that enabling someone isn't love. It's cruelty disguised as kindness. Every time I'd bailed her out, every time I'd absorbed the consequences of her choices, I'd been teaching her that she didn't need to be responsible for her own life. I'd been crippling her just as surely as my parents had been crippling me. On my 18th birthday, I signed my enlistment papers and blocked all their numbers. Basic training was hell, but it was a different kind of hell than living in that house. It was hell with purpose, hell that built me up instead of tearing me down. For the first time in 2 lifetimes, I was surrounded by people who judged me based on my performance, not on my willingness to be a doormat. I excelled in ways that surprised even me. Leadership came naturally when you'd spent 18 years managing a dysfunctional family's emotional chaos. Physical challenges were nothing when you'd worked 3 jobs while maintaining a 4.0 GPA. The strict discipline was refreshing after years of walking on eggshells around my family's volatile moods and ever-changing expectations. My drill instructor pulled me aside after the first month. "Henderson, I don't know what your story is, but you've got something most of these kids don't. You understand that discipline isn't punishment, it's freedom. You get that following orders isn't about submission, it's about being part of something bigger than yourself." He was right. For the first time in my life, I was part of a system that made sense, where effort was rewarded and merit was recognized, where my value wasn't tied to how much I could give up for someone else's benefit. 3 months into basic training, I got a letter from my Aunt Susan, my mother's sister who'd been cut off from the family years earlier for interfering in their business. I'd barely remembered her existence, but apparently she'd been keeping tabs on our family dynamics from a distance. "Emma," she wrote in careful cursive, "I heard through the grapevine about your decision to leave for the military. I wanted you to know that I've been watching your family's situation for years and you made the right choice. Your parents called me last week asking if I'd help pay for Claire's college expenses since you abandoned your responsibilities. I told them exactly what I've wanted to tell them for 20 years, that they created this mess by putting all their emotional and financial eggs in one golden basket while treating their other daughter like an unpaid servant. I tried to intervene when you were younger, but your mother accused me of trying to poison you against the family. That's when they cut contact with me. I've regretted not fighting harder for you ever since. Claire was rejected from every decent college she applied to. Your parents are scrambling to find schools that will accept her, but the ones that will take her are expensive and not particularly good. They're talking about taking out a second mortgage on the house to pay for it. The same house they refinanced 3 years ago to buy Claire that art studio in the basement that she used for exactly 6 months before getting bored. I'm not telling you this to make you feel guilty. I'm telling you because you should feel vindicated. You saw this coming and saved yourself. That takes more courage than most people ever manage in their entire lives. I'm proud of you, even if your parents are too blind to be. I read that letter 3 times before the relief hit me like a physical wave. In my previous life, I'd never known that anyone else had seen what was happening to me. I'd been gaslit so thoroughly that I'd questioned my own perceptions even as I was dying from the stress of carrying everyone else's burdens. But Susan had seen it. Someone had witnessed the dysfunction and recognized it for what it was. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't ungrateful. I wasn't wrong. 6 months into my service, the calls started coming to the base. My commanding officer called me into his office with a bemused expression. "Henderson, I've got your family on the phone claiming there's a medical emergency, and they need to speak with you immediately." When I asked for details, they got vague and started talking about emotional distress and family obligations. "You want to tell me what's going on?" I could picture them perfectly, my parents in their designer living room, probably with Claire crying dramatically in the background, spinning some story about how my absence was causing psychological trauma that required my immediate attention. "Permission to speak freely, sir?" "Hey, granted. My family has boundary issues. They're trying to manipulate me into coming home to fund my sister's lifestyle. There's no medical emergency." He studied me for a long moment. "You sure about that? They sound pretty worked up." "With respect, sir, they're always worked up about something, usually about how I'm not giving them enough money or attention or free labor." His eyebrows rose slightly. "I see. Well, in that case, I'll let them know you're unavailable for personal calls during training, and they should contact you through official channels if there's a legitimate emergency." The calls stopped after that, but the letters didn't. My mother's handwriting became increasingly erratic as the months passed, her usual perfect penmanship deteriorating into jagged scratches across expensive stationery. "Emma, you're killing your father with worry. His blood pressure is through the roof, and the doctor says it's stress-related. Is this what you wanted? To destroy your family out of spite?" Claire is falling apart without her sister. She can barely get out of bed some days. She keeps asking what she did wrong to make you hate her so much. The business is struggling without your help with the books. We might lose everything we've worked for. I hope you're happy. Each letter was a masterclass in emotional manipulation, designed to trigger the guilt and sense of responsibility they'd spent 18 years programming into me. In my previous life, these exact same tactics had worked perfectly. I'd come running back at the first sign of crisis, ready to sacrifice myself on the altar of family obligation. This time, I read each letter once and filed it away. I was building a record of their behavior, documenting the escalation of their manipulation tactics for my own clarity. It helped to see it all laid out in black and white, the threats, the guilt trips, the attempts to blame me for consequences that were entirely of their own making. 1 year into my service, I was promoted ahead of schedule and recommended for officer candidate school. My test scores were off the charts, my performance reviews glowing, my leadership potential noted by multiple superiors. I was being fast-tracked for opportunities that would set me up for life. Real opportunities based on merit, not on my willingness to be exploited. The same week I got my promotion, Susan sent another letter. "Emma, I thought you should know that your parents lost the house last month. They took out that second mortgage to pay for Claire's first year at prestige private college, then had to take out additional loans when she decided to change majors 3 times in one semester. Claire failed most of her classes and is on academic probation, but your parents are still paying full tuition because she just needs time to find her passion. No, your father's business has been struggling since you left. Apparently, you were handling more of the day-to-day operations than anyone realized, and he can't manage both the creative and administrative sides on his own. He's had to let go of 2 employees and is talking about bankruptcy. Claire has been in and out of therapy for what your mother calls adjustment disorders, but from what I can tell, she's simply never learned how to handle disappointment or failure. She's having what normal people would call growing pains, but your family is treating it like a mental health crisis. Your mother called me crying last week, begging me to help them figure out how to contact you. She says they're willing to negotiate now, whatever that means. I told her that if they wanted to repair their relationship with you, they should start by acknowledging how badly they'd treated you and work on becoming people worth having a relationship with. She hung up on me. "I'm not telling you this to upset you, but because I think you deserve to know that your predictions are coming true. The family structure that depended on your sacrifice was never sustainable. Without you propping it up, it's collapsing exactly as you said it would." I read Susan's letter sitting in my barracks, surrounded by the sounds of my fellow soldiers going about their evening routines. People who judged me based on my character and abilities, who respected me for my competence, who had no idea that I'd once been considered the family disappointment. For the first time since leaving home, I felt a pang of something that might have been sadness. Not regret. I knew I'd made the right choice. But sadness for the family we could have been if they'd been capable of seeing me as a person instead of a resource. 2 years in, I was accepted into a prestigious military sponsored program to finish my degree while serving. Full scholarship, plus salary, plus guaranteed job placement after graduation. I chose international relations with a focus on conflict resolution, skills that would serve me well in both military and civilian careers. My professors were impressed with my work ethic and analytical abilities. My thesis advisor told me I had a natural talent for understanding complex systems and finding practical solutions to seemingly intractable problems. You think like someone who's seen real conflict, she said. Like you understand that sometimes the only way to solve a problem is to change the entire framework. She had no idea how right she was. The same semester I started my degree program, Claire had her first overdose. The call came through official channels, a Red Cross notification of a family emergency. I was given emergency leave to attend to the situation, but when I called the hospital for details, the picture that emerged was far from the medical crisis my family had painted. Claire had been found unconscious in her dorm room after disappearing for 2 days. She'd been mixing prescription stimulants with alcohol, using ADHD medication to try to keep up with her coursework, then drinking to come down from the stimulants when she couldn't sleep. The doctor I spoke with was blunt. Miss Henderson's medical situation is stable, but this appears to be part of a pattern of risky behavior rather than a one-time accident. She's been treating our emergency room like a personal clinic for the past 6 months. Anxiety attacks, insomnia, what she calls academic stress. We've recommended counseling and psychiatric evaluation multiple times, but she's refused treatment. When I asked to speak with my parents, the picture became even clearer. "Emma, thank God," my mother sobbed into the phone. "Claire needs you. She's been so lost without her big sister. The doctors say she might not recover properly without family support." "What kind of support are they talking about, Mom?" "Well, she'll need someone to help her catch up with her schoolwork, and monitor her medication, and maybe help with her living expenses so she doesn't have to stress about money while she's recovering." In other words, they wanted me to drop everything, come home, and resume my role as Claire's personal life manager. They wanted me to sacrifice my education, my military career, and my future to clean up a mess that was entirely of Claire's making. "Where are you in all this?" I asked. "We're doing everything we can, but we're not young anymore, Emma. Your father's health isn't good, and I can't handle Claire's emotional needs on my own. She needs her sister. She needs professional help and natural consequences for her choices," I said quietly. "What she doesn't need is someone enabling her destructive behavior by removing all the reasons she might have to get better." There was a long pause. "You're not coming home." It wasn't a question. "No, Mom, I'm not coming home." The silence stretched out until I could hear my mother's breathing become shallow and rapid. "You're really going to abandon your sister when she needs you most?" "I'm going to let her face the consequences of her choices without cushioning the blow. Sometimes that's the most loving thing you can do for someone." She hung up on me. I stayed at my base, finished my coursework, and tried not to think about Claire lying in a hospital bed, wondering why her sister didn't love her enough to come save her. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done, but I'd learned from my previous life that some lessons can only be learned through consequences, and some people will never learn at all if you keep rescuing them from their own choices. 3 years in, I graduated summa cum laude with a degree in international relations. I was offered positions with the State Department, the CIA, and a private consulting firm that specialized in international security. My military record was spotless, my recommendations glowing, my future brighter than anything I'd ever imagined possible in my previous life. I was also engaged to Marcus Chen, a fellow officer who'd served 2 tours overseas and understood the value of duty, service, and personal responsibility. Our relationship was built on mutual respect and shared values rather than one person sacrificing everything for the other's happiness. Marcus had grown up in a similar family dynamic. The responsible child expected to fund and manage his siblings' lives, while his own dreams took a backseat to family obligations. He'd broken free at 17 by getting emancipated and putting himself through college on academic scholarships. The hardest part, he told me one evening as we walked around the base, wasn't leaving. It was accepting that I couldn't save them from themselves. My younger brother is in prison now for drugs. My sister has 3 kids by different fathers and lives on welfare. My parents blame me for abandoning the family when they could have used my help. Do you ever regret leaving? He was quiet for a long moment. I regret that they couldn't love me enough to want me to succeed, but I don't regret choosing my own life over their dysfunction. Some people are drowning, and some people are choosing to drown. You can't save someone who's actively swimming toward the bottom. I understood exactly what he meant. 4 years in, we had a small military wedding with our fellow officers and a few family members. I invited Susan, who cried through the entire ceremony and told me I looked happier than she'd ever seen me. Marcus's grandparents came, the only family members who'd supported his decision to leave home and build his own life. I didn't invite my parents or Claire. I sent them a wedding announcement after the fact with a note that said, "I wanted to let you know that I'm married and doing well. I hope you can find happiness in your own lives." My mother's response came 3 days later. A 10-page letter that was part guilt trip, part character assassination, and part desperate plea for me to come home and fix everything that had gone wrong since I left. "Your sister tried to kill herself again last month," she wrote. "She said it was because she felt abandoned by the only person who ever really understood her." Is this what you wanted? To drive your baby sister to suicide? I read the letter once and filed it with all the others. I'd learned to recognize emotional blackmail when I saw it, and I refused to be held responsible for choices that other adults were making about their own lives. That if Claire was genuinely suicidal, she needed professional help, not her sister coming to rescue her from consequences. If she was using suicide attempts as manipulation tactics, which seemed more likely given the timing of each crisis, then responding to them would only reinforce the behavior. Either way, my coming home wouldn't solve the real problem. 5 years in, I was stationed at the U.S. Embassy in London, working in security liaison with international intelligence agencies. I had a beautiful flat overlooking the Thames, a husband who adored me, and a career that challenged and fulfilled me in ways I'd never imagined possible. I spoke 4 languages, had traveled to 23 countries, and was being considered for a senior position that would make me one of the youngest department heads in embassy history. My life was everything I'd dreamed of in those dark moments of my previous existence: meaningful work, financial security, genuine love, and the respect of my peers. I was also completely no contact with my birth family. It hadn't been an easy decision. There were still moments when I wondered if I could have helped them change, if I should have tried harder to teach them healthier relationship patterns before walking away entirely. But then I'd remember my previous life, the decades I'd spent trying to set boundaries they respected, trying to make them see me as a person instead of a resource, trying to teach Claire responsibility while they undermined every lesson with their enabling. Some people only learn from consequences. Some people don't learn at all. And some people will actively resist learning if it means losing their convenient source of emotional and financial support. My family fell into all 3 categories. Susan continued to send occasional updates, though they grew shorter and more infrequent as the years passed. Claire had dropped out of college after her 3rd overdose. My parents had lost the house and moved into a small apartment across town. Dad's business had folded entirely, and he was working part-time as a consultant for his former competitors. Claire was living at home again, unemployed, cycling through various addiction recovery programs that never seemed to stick. She'd been in and out of rehab facilities, therapy programs, and halfway houses for 3 years running. Each attempt at getting clean lasted a few months before she'd relapse and the cycle would start over. "Your parents keep saying this is temporary," Susan wrote in her latest letter, "that Claire just needs to find the right treatment program, the right therapist, the right medication. But from the outside, it looks like she's never learned how to handle the basic challenges of adult life because she's never had to. Every time she faces a consequence, your parents swoop in to fix it. Every time she fails, they find someone else to blame: her professors, her roommates, her therapists, and especially you." 6 years in, Claire died. The notification came through the Red Cross again, but this time there was no request for emergency leave, no family member demanding my immediate presence. Just a simple message: family member deceased, funeral arrangements pending. I called Susan for details. She'd been clean for almost 4 months this time. Susan told me, her voice heavy with the exhaustion of someone who'd watched this cycle too many times. Living in a halfway house, working part-time at a coffee shop, going to meetings. Your parents were so hopeful. They kept saying she'd finally turned the corner. What happened? She relapsed on what would have been your birthday. The police think she'd been planning it for weeks. She'd saved up enough pills to make sure there wouldn't be a next time. Mixed prescription opioids with alcohol, the same combination that had nearly killed her before. I didn't cry at first. I felt empty. Sad, but not surprised. Guilty, but not responsible. In my previous life, I'd been there for every overdose, every crisis, every midnight emergency call. I'd enabled her addiction by making it possible for her to avoid the real consequences of her choices. This time, I'd let her face her demons alone. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done, but it was also the most honest. I couldn't save someone who was determined to destroy herself, and killing myself in the attempt wouldn't honor either of our lives. The funeral is Saturday, Susan continued. Your parents, they're not doing well. Your father looks like he's aged 20 years in the past 6 months. Your mother barely speaks anymore. I think they're finally understanding that their choices contributed to this outcome, but understanding and accepting are different things. Are they blaming me? They're blaming everyone. Themselves, you, Claire's doctors, the treatment facilities, society in general. But mostly, they're just broken. I don't think they know how to exist without a crisis to manage or a child to save. I arranged for a floral arrangement to be sent to the funeral with a card that read, "I'm sorry for your loss. I hope you find peace." I didn't attend the service, but I took the day off and spent it walking along the Thames, thinking about the sister I'd loved and lost twice. Once to addiction, and once to the choice to save myself instead of drowning with her. 7 years in, I received the last letter I'd ever get from my family. It was handwritten in shaky script I barely recognized as my father's. He'd suffered a stroke 6 months after Claire's death, stress-induced, according to the doctors. Mom had developed early-onset dementia triggered by what the specialists called complicated grief disorder and decades of chronic anxiety. The letter had been dictated to a nurse because Dad's writing hand no longer worked properly. "Emma," it began, "I know I have no right to contact you after everything we put you through. Susan told me you blamed yourself for Claire's death, and I need you to know that's not true. We failed Claire. We failed you. We were so afraid of being bad parents that we became the worst kind of parents, the kind who sacrifice one child for another. I've had a lot of time to think since the stroke, and I remember things I tried to forget. I remember you at 5 years old, reading to Claire when she had the flu, even though you were sick yourself. I remember you at 10, giving up your birthday party money so Claire could have the art set she wanted. I remember you at 15, working weekends at the grocery store so we could afford to send Claire to art camp. You were the best of us, Emma. You were kind and giving and strong and wise beyond your years. Instead of celebrating those qualities, we took advantage of them. We taught you that your worth was in what you could do for others, not in who you were as a person. We taught Claire that she was entitled to everything without earning any of it. We destroyed both our daughters in different ways. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not asking you to come home or send money or try to fix this. I'm asking you to forgive yourself. Claire's death wasn't your fault. Our family's destruction wasn't your fault. You saw what we couldn't see, that helping someone destroy themselves isn't love, it's enabling. You saved yourself, Emma. That took more courage than I ever had in my whole life. I'm proud of you for being stronger and wiser than your old man. Live your life. Be happy. Find people who love you for who you are, not what you can do for them. That's all I ever should have wanted for both my girls. Your mother doesn't remember much these days, but in her lucid moments, she talks about you. She says she dreams about a little girl with braids who used to make her coffee in the mornings before school. She can't remember why that little girl went away, but she misses her. I remember why you left. I remember everything, and I'm sorry. I read that letter sitting in my office at the embassy, looking out at the London skyline, and cried for the first time since Claire's death. Not for her. I'd already grieved that relationship. Not for my parents. They'd made their choices with full knowledge of the consequences. I cried for the family we could have been, For the father who'd finally understood, too late to save anyone but maybe himself. For the mother who remembered loving a little girl but couldn't recall why she'd stopped. For the sister who died without ever learning who she could have been if she'd been raised to believe in her own strength instead of her right to be rescued. And I cried for the little girl with braids who used to make coffee in the mornings, who'd tried so hard to earn love by being useful that she'd almost forgotten how to be human. But I didn't write back. There was nothing left to say. My parents died within 6 months of each other when I was 35. Dad from complications related to his stroke, Mom from what the doctors called failure to thrive. They'd spent their final years in assisted living, their money gone, their golden child dead, their scapegoat daughter living a successful life an ocean away. Susan called to let me know about each death, but I didn't attend either funeral. I'd said my goodbyes years ago when I walked out their door for the last time.